Thank you. Thank you very much for that nice welcome. I always say that when I listen to my speeches, but other people did, a few, you heard them, and maybe contribute a little bit toward a better society. You know, I decided to run for Congress relating to the monetary issue. And I had decided that all governments destroy the money at the same time society is destroyed. You know, the political system goes bad, the money goes bad, they come together or whatever. And that was what was happening in the early 70s when I decided to run, and that was in 71. It was a significant date in monetary history, and that was on August 15, 1971. The last restraint on the money manipulators, the Federal Reserve, was removed. That was when they closed the gold window, and that gave the Federal Reserve a lot more power. And I said, well, that's not good. I don't even like the Federal Reserve. We want to get rid of the Federal Reserve, don't we? So that motivated me because it accidentally, the way I see it, ended up sending me to Washington because I just wanted to make a statement and didn't think people would pay much attention to this. You know, I remember early on when I was first elected in this fluke election in 1976, you know, I was invited to a Reason banquet, and Reason had just been started back then. And they had me there. It was a nice crowd. And so I figured they were really into this philosophy, and I made a statement. I said, you know, some of my best friends are anarchists. And there were about 6 of them that sort of understood and did this. So it wasn't much to their interest. But you know, there's something about how we look at government. Some people think I don't like government, and there's certain governments I do like. But I like to think about sovereignty. That's what I want to talk about. I don't want this government sovereignty, whether it's local, state, national, or international. What I want is individual sovereignty where you have a right and a responsibility to take care of yourself, and the rules should be very strict, but you should not incorporate government. This what you need? Boy, somebody must not have wanted to hurt me. They didn't tell me. No, I think that is real important, is that you have an answer for those who say, you guys don't even want any government. That's just total chaos. You mean more chaos than we have now? You know, and we have elections. We believe in democracy. The dictatorship of the monopoly of the majority. They can do anything they want to the minority. I never understood why people were attractive to punishing the minority by incessantly saying, we need democracy. We believe in democracy. We believe in American exceptionalism so badly. We're going to go to war in all the countries of the world. We're going to be in 170 countries, and we're going to teach them about American exceptionalism and democracy. Well, tell you what, they're playing into our hand. They're proving that government doesn't work and that the government's going to collapse. It's in the midst of it now, but we need to be prepared to take care of ourselves and try to promote a system of government and interpersonal relationships that recognizes that individuals are important. You know, and it's not complicated. Well, what would do it? How would you deal with the regulations you need to tell people what they can buy and sell and how much to charge? Well, there's only one rule you need. All associations should be voluntary. Now, how does that work? Oh, you mean that's when you go to the hardware store, you can be voluntary with the owner and come up price and pay. No, everything. You know, some people in the political system find that voluntarism and free pricing and the market system deserves some attention, and they will give it some support. And that's pretty good for one group of people. But for that same group who says you should have voluntarism in economic policy, they're not so interested in making sure that you have total voluntarism in everything else, everything social. You know, people should have a right, a sovereignty to their life, and they can do what they want. They can, you know, this is the hard part. They can even do dumb things that hurt them, and government can't prevent that. And the more laws you pass to say that, well, we don't want you to hurt yourself, then there'll be trouble. That's the main problem that we run into, is that governments assume the responsibility, at least this is a pretense, of making sure that the government can protect us, not from our enemies from without, but protect us from ourselves, that we're not smart enough to take care of ourselves, and it won't work. And that's what they've been working on. But you know, right now, this primary season should give you a lot of encouragement. I mean, it ain't gonna work. And then people are saying, well, maybe Ron Paul and a few other people have this idea. Maybe they ought to leave us alone. Let us just take care of our own problems. And right now, I think we're moving in that direction. I think our goal has to be, how do you reduce the threat of violence, you know, that comes? Because those who have perpetuated this system are very violent people. Oh, no, they're for limiting guns. They're for limiting your guns, but they never limit the amount of people in Congress and Washington and in the bureaucracy who carry guns. Hundreds of thousands of federal bureaucrats carrying guns, and then they preach safety by taking the guns away from somebody that might be able to protect themselves. Doesn't make much sense to me. You know, when I first went into Congress, I learned what quid pro quo was. You've heard a little bit about quid pro quo, and somebody said that there are people in administration, they're practicing quid pro quo. They're doing things for some benefit. But tell you what, I got to thinking about that, and everything they do in Washington is quid pro quo. Everything. Because, you know, you do this and I'll do this for you. The first week I was in Congress, in that unexpected victory, didn't know how that happened. I went to the people in charge and I said, well, you know, I want to be on the banking committee. And I have this, you know, intense interest in monetary policy. And they looked at me and they said, you know, that's okay, but what are you going to give us? You know, immediately, first day there, what are you going to get? You just we don't give you something or what you want unless you promise. And at that particular time, they knew a little bit about me, and I interested in monetary policy. There was a big thing going on with IMF by bailing out all the banks in the 70s. And what they really wanted for me to say, I will vote for the bailout of the banks, which somehow or another I didn't have to do that, and I did get the seat on the banking committee, but it is quid pro quo all the time, and this is so much hypocrisy that goes on, you know, with how they deal with these things. And the other thing that I bet you've noticed is it's hard to trust people who are in government. Have you ever noticed that? I mean, there's no reason why you should. There's some good people there. There's no doubt about that. But the large majority are there for the wrong reason, let me tell you. The majority are there to feel good about the power they have and how much, and they're conditioned to believing that they're very important people to help people's lives get better. And why do we go to war all the time? And we in the United States, we continue to allow them to do it. Well, we have to promote democracy, American exceptionalism. We have to go and teach people how to live in peaceful conditions. So what do? We have armies bigger than all the other armies put together. We spend hundreds of billions of dollars building equipment like the F-35 that won't work. And we keep doing this always because we're going to do goodness. We're going to do good things. And it turns out that if they believe it, they've been lying to themselves. There's enough lying going on, about half of it is the politician who lies to himself. He actually gets convinced of this, that without them, those politicians doing what they do by taxing and regulating and doing all these things, the world would be worse off. Well, tell you what, I happen to believe that the world would be much better off if our government was reduced by at least 80%. You know, the other day, I'm thinking of a other representative running, one of the people running for the presidency, Elizabeth. She was lecturing. She was lecturing somebody. She said that she was lecturing the person that was wanting to become one of the next board members on the Federal Reserve, Sheldon, Judy Sheldon. And she's controversial. She used to like gold, but doesn't like it now, this sort of thing. But Elizabeth, what she did, she wrote a paper on this, that she was attacking her. She said she doesn't always tell the truth. We can't have her in there like they haven't. You know, it's a system that doesn't work very well, and it's expected. What we're having today is exactly what people have predicted. That we have a system. Sometimes our friends will say, yes, we have too much socialism. We have a socialistic type of government. We don't have socialism. What we have is the extreme endpoint of interventionism, which is exactly what the Democrats and the Republicans liked. I mean, did we get socialized medicine under Obama? No, we got more interference and more transfer of wealth. But when you have a system of interventionism in economics and you just proceed, it eventually destroys the very system that you're trying to save, and then it does become socialized. And I think that the term confuses people because now we know the socialists are about to take over. But I think I like to think about authoritarianism. You know, how much authoritarianism are they expressing? There's some people who want absolute authoritarian control of the people, and there's still a lot of them around. But the authoritarians and the others would say, well, we don't need all this. But the authoritarians, it will always get worse. It's sort of like, let's have, well, you know, an income tax. Why should you be against an income tax? For the rich. We'll tax the rich 1 or 2%, and that's going to solve all our problems. And somebody said, oh, that might expand and collect a lot of money and hurt the middle class. Yes, and sometimes it exempts the very wealthy. They hide their money someplace else. So it doesn't really work. But it's the incrementalism and the pretense and the lying about it. And it's constant. And that, to me, is so unfortunate. What about our foreign policy? Our foreign policy is based on lies. Lies and innuendos about our next enemy who's going to be marching in here and take away our freedoms. We should be concerned about our freedom, but nobody's going to march in and invade us. We have to deal with the people in charge in Washington if you want to protect our liberties. Yeah. And that's a harder thing to sell because right now everybody's very happy with the way things are going, except for the Democrats and the Republicans. But did you ever notice that the Democrats and the Republicans do pretty well on some big issue? If it's a big issue, they agree. You know, during the hearings the other day, there was a pause in the impeachment hearings, and the pause was they had to go vote, and they voted the budget, which was supposed to have been passed by October of last year. Well, they finally passed it on December 20th of last year, and guess who voted for it? Republicans and Democrats. And most of them, it was midst of that, everybody wanted to go home. It was Christmas time. They threw it out there. It was voted and passed. But they get along quite well when it's spending. How often do you think? How often do you think one party does a better job on foreign policy than the other? They do. They hem and haw, and they demagogue it. And I'm for peace. We got to get out of here and do this. But we still go around the world. Sometimes we are told, "Well, we're coming home from ABC country. That's good." And on my program, I say, "That's good. We like them. Bring them all home." And lo and behold, a week later, we put more troops in there. We're still in 170 countries around the world. It's coming to an end, and that's the good news. We can't do it. We can't sustain it. Just think of what happened when the Soviets got burdened down in Afghanistan. And we had some of our leaders say, "Well, we've learned the lesson. We would never get bogged down in Afghanistan." And then we had now we have been there 19 years. So it's the same old program. There's a few in the Senate now and the House that try to bring the resolutions up and try to say it's time to go home. But when I was running for the presidency, a lot of times this question would come up with a lot of hostility because I was so unpatriotic. And I said, "Well, it's not that complicated. You know, we just marched in. Why don't we just march out?" It's really not complicated. And it would fix up so many things. It would put a dent into the spending. It'd do a lot of things and save a lot of lives. Nobody really counts the lives anymore. I tell you what, we've counted and concentrated, and I don't want to belittle this because I'll get in trouble, but I think there's been 125 people died from the coronavirus, and that's very serious. But do you know that 10,000 people in this country died from the flu this flu season? I mean, why don't we bring us together a little bit? I mean, we have to look at this in perspective. That reminds me of what I came across when I first went into office. And it was the summer of '76, and Ford was president, and there was a swine flu scare. I'll bet there's a few people in here who remember the swine flu scare. And politically, it was advantageous to save the people from swine flu. And they decided, they appropriated $137 million for this, and they started inoculating people. They inoculated 45 million people in this country. There was never a case of the flu. Matter of fact, there was no deaths from the flu, and yet there were significant deaths from the shot. There were 500 people that died from that Guillain-Barré syndrome, very, very serious disease with total paralysis. And fortunately, it's not quite like polio. You can get better, but it's very, very serious. But they had that many cases. And, when that came up, it was my first week there. And I thought, well, I know what I've been saying. I told them I was going to stick to my guns. So I looked at this, and votes going up, and everybody voting for this. I said, I don't believe in dealing with this problem this way. And who knows, it might not be all that serious. So I went and talked to one other member of Congress at the time, another physician in the Democratic Party, Larry McDonald, and I talked with him, and he wasn't for it either. So two people voted against that monstrosity. Both were doctors, figuring it wasn't a medical emergency, and it certainly was political mischief and financial mischief. It was so unnecessary, and I figured, well, that's probably helped influence me a little safe and take care of people getting the flu. But I tell you what, there's 10,000 people died from the flu this year, and 650,000 people worldwide. And how many people have we killed in these wars? Do they get annoyed by this? Well, I tell you what, they're not going to get annoyed until the American people wake up and say enough is enough. But the trouble is, and this is the realistic approach, there's no way that we're going to wean the monsters off, this spending spree. It's not going to happen. And now you say, well, what did you go up there for? Well, I didn't go up there with the expectation. I didn't even think I was going there. I don't know why anybody sent me, because I promised them in the conventional center nothing. I was just wanted to give them something which was called freedom. So I didn't think they cared, but there were a few people that did care about it and sent me up. But this is something that we should be engaged in, because I think there is every bit of downturn that we're facing, there's an opportunity for it. And I think that this system is going to come to an end. And the Soviet system collapsed, and no matter how much they want to scare you and say that we have to march on Moscow, it's not like it was when I was drafted in 1962 and there were missiles in Cuba. No, it's not like that. The Soviets aren't there, and yet we don't seem to ever understand or learn any lessons, and we just pursue the same thing. And it is a rejection of basic principles that we have. And what is the purpose of government? And the founders tried to describe it. It didn't last long. It started, weakening, immediately. And this has continued. The Constitution, and I do talk about it, because at least if we did follow the Constitution, things would be better. But they're not going to follow the Constitution, but they ought to know what is in it. And then we have to decide. They're probably not going to endorse my idea about individual sovereignty, where you have your life back and you can do whatever you want with your life, and you can do it as long as you do one thing correctly. Don't ever hurt anybody else. Why is this so complicated? And, in reading about this and looking at the Ten Commandments and other great religions, all the great religions talk about peace. They talk about peace and love. And yet, almost everybody in the world belongs to some religion, but they seem to water that down. And I guess that's the way it's going to be. But what I would like to do is work and replace what we have with everybody taking care of themselves. And in the meantime, do our best to point out the errors of our way, and we can do better. But I think this campaign is going to be very beneficial. Buttigieg is an individual. All I would do about talking about him is study him carefully. I tell you, he is really, really strong in cultural Marxism and Gramsci, and he has a background. He was in the CIA branch in the military, and he didn't even have to get a physical to go in. They just put him in there because it was CIA, I don't have much respect for the CIA. And if we talk about lying that goes on and all, can anybody visualize and what we have to put up with and understand this? So we have somebody in the CIA and in the State Department who says, oh, yeah, we do lie and we cheat and we steal and we kill. Ha, ha, ha. My gosh, how could it get any worse than that? And yet, it's a joke. But that's what we have become. We have become a joke because we don't talk about our liberties and the fundamentals of responsibilities, because one half will say, well, people won't take care of themselves. They'll starve to death. Oh, sure. Yeah, and what are they doing in Venezuela? Socialism doesn't solve their problem. So it's a mess, and yet our biggest challenge, though, is competing with the mainstream media and our universities. All this cultural Marxism stuff is just, to me, outrageous. And if people want to do something outrageous and do really stupid things, and they do it voluntarily by themselves, it'd be no big deal. We let them go ahead and do that. The same way, if you earn your money and you blow it and lose it and all that, we can't regulate that. We can't regulate behavior. It's a whole thing that vices should never be crimes. because every one of us have a few vices, don't we? And vices, but we make everything criminal, and and then we have built this empire up there, regulating everything that we do in our lives. So I think that there's lots that can be accomplished, and we should move in that direction, but we have to start with the basic thing. We have a natural right to our life and our liberties, and we have a responsibility to take care of ourselves and our family and friends voluntarily. If you think voluntarism and self-sovereignty, I think the world would be a better place. And the one reason why I love this philosophy is that I think ultimate happiness comes from feeling like you've achieved something. And I think you get the achievement, and you get this feeling with a sense of excellence and virtue, but it has to be voluntary. If you do it and you accomplish something, you don't get it by getting free stuff. Matter of fact, all you did is you're a criminal. You're hurting somebody you took it from, and the free stuff doesn't make you happy. So that's it. But the cause of liberty is alive and well. I'm encouraged by the many people I meet, and I still go to the college campuses, and they're not like they portray them on television. And there's every reason to be optimistic, because we don't know what will come tomorrow, except for the fact that this monster that we're dealing with today can't last, because we're going bankrupt, and it's going to be havoc for us, and we better be ready to help replace it with a sound system that protects liberty. I want to thank you very much. Thank you. Woo, it's warm. Thanks. Thank you. That was very nice. Thank you.
We're not done with Dr. Paul just yet.
Pardon me?
Dr. Paul? We're going to sit over here. We asked people to submit questions for Dr. Paul through social media. We've selected some of them, and I am going to ask him those questions now on their behalf. So, Dr. Paul, it's a pleasure. You never know where life is going to take you. Kurt from Mauritius wants to know, how will politics ever be useful without self-imposed accountability by politicians?
Can't be. You can't do it. You have to have people who are accountable, and we don't. And many go to Washington with very good intentions, but it doesn't last, because the first thing they tell an individual who has these good intentions, they say, well, what committee you want to be on? Oh, okay, well, you have to do this. You have to vote, a certain way. And so they lose it immediately, because it's the best thing they can do to promote their districts, and take care of their constituents. And that's their obligation, is take care of their constituents. So they're well intended, but obviously they give up their beliefs rather quickly. I've always said that, a lot of times I would token and sometimes enthusiastically help somebody get into Congress with all these promises. I'm going to vote with you. And then they didn't do it. But I could usually tell within a week because they come to him and said, you want to get ahead and you want to take care of your district, so you better vote this way today.
Excellent. I think this is a great follow-up question then. Why are there so few, if any, ex and current American politicians that champion freedom like yourself?
That's, I could say nasty things about them. Well, I think they're ignorant. in a intellectual sense. They're ignorant. They don't know what's going on. They don't know how liberty works. And we get glimpses of it. And the glimpse of liberty has been around for thousands of years, moving this incrementally. But I think it's so much easier to compromise. It's the willingness to compromise and then be complimented for it. I remember one time to speak. This was when I think Jim Wright was there and Bob Michael. They were Republican Democratic leader, but the Republicans had nobody, so they worked things out. And I remember it was a terrible, terrible bill. And the Republicans did a little bit of speaking out against it, but then Michael came, I think it was Michael, and he gave a real great speech on why you should help the Democrats get this terrible bill passed. So he sold out the few people who were hinting this way. But to me, the amazing thing is that Jim Wright, who was a wheeler and dealer, he says, that's what I like. I like to have the statesmanship that you can express. To them, it was statesmanship, and, oh, good, I'm a statesman. And they live in a different world. But to where that comes from is hard to say. They have to be influenced by other people. And but it should be natural. I think it gets beaten out of us. The economic policy. I always said that I didn't have all these views by the time I left college, but whether it was high school or college or what, the views expressed to me, molded a lot of my thinking. And I said, I probably had to go about 10 years getting rid of the bad ideas that our school system have been preaching. And that's one reason why I have a homeschooling program, because I think ultimately, that's what's necessary. And the statement has been made of those that work in the homeschooling is that the public government school system is a prison. And all you have to do is look at it, and stifling. Oh my, it's just horrible, But They'd like to make it illegal, which they've tried in the past, and they still will, because you're challenging the state. They'll challenge religion, they'll challenge private schooling, and they challenge the television and the internet. And for them, they're promoting what they have come to around accepting as a good cause, and it's Americanism. But why each one joins, I guess it's different for different people.
Okay, this comes from Raza from Los Angeles. How do we get rid of the Federal Reserve when the current governmental system makes that nearly impossible?
Well, the Federal Reserve is going to disappear.
All right.
Even this week when I did my weekly report, I was talking about how he said, well, and he was alluding to the fact that when the next recession, crisis comes, he said, we won't have many tools left. We can't manipulate interest rates. They're low enough. He says, we'll have to do it with QE. So that's they'll keep doing this, but they'll lose credibility. I think the fact that a lot of you in this audience, maybe every one of you, are thinking about the alternative to a government monopolized monetary system, and this is why my answer to that wasn't to become the expert on cryptocurrencies as well as I wanted to be the promoter of freedom of choice in all currency matters and get the government as far away from you as possible.
Yeah. Okay, this comes from Wotech from Toronto. What are your thoughts on how to abolish the two-party system, which gives us the illusion of choice, and restore a true democracy?
Well, I think the answer was in the question, because he gave you the illusion of choice. You have no choices. Some of the things like, well, you're going to vote for Republican this year, aren't you? Oh, yeah, they're the fiscal conservatives. No, they work together, and I alluded to that a little bit in the speech, that they work together, all the big issues they join with. But it'll be the system will collapse, the financial system will collapse, the monetary system will collapse, and but the big threat is what's going to happen, because what could happen is what people think anarchy is all about. That anarchy is violence and killing and no sovereignty. But that is the reason why actually it's really down to a moral issue. Adams was very adamant about this. He said that without a moral society, the Constitution doesn't have a prayer, and it's not doing very well. And I said that before that when the society deteriorates, the principle of the currency deteriorates because it's based on fraud, it's based on counterfeit, and that's what people have to be taught. But it will fail, and I think the dollar may, by its name, may exist, but the dollar is not going to remain as the reserve currency of the world. It's already being pushed around, but the other ones are so bad, and that's what makes it very dangerous. Because if we could wave a wand and had everybody accept our principle, yeah, I'll take care of myself. I'm not going to be taxed, and you're not going to come in here with government guns and tell me what to do. I think you'd feel, wow, that's a great idea, but that's not going to happen. So. But it never will be, never was quite that way even at the beginning. But I think you have to have the goals. I mean, these cultural Marxists that had cultural economics and now social matters, they are true believers, I'll tell you. And they know exactly what they want, and they're not going to walk away from this. And we need to have some believers in liberty is what is necessary. Sure, we have to protect ourselves, but ultimately, governments are evil, and they're going to come, and they're always going to want to control things. The monetary system, a private monetary system, or whatever, even without fraud, you're going to hear from the government. So that's why when I discovered this amazing thing, I said, well, one of my investments that I could make, because I enjoy doing it, and that is try to promote the cause of liberty, because that's where I invest my time and energy. So no matter what you do, I hope you're very, very successful, and you're very well protected financially and physically. But ultimately, your protection is trying to find your friends who understand this message and get them to endorse that message. And that, of course, is getting their education elsewhere than from a government school system.
Tony from Melbourne asks, how dangerous is coronavirus to the economy?
Well, it's dangerous to the economy because people aren't looking at it sensibly. The first reaction in the first week, and it's dangerous to downplay something, because even if there's nothing compared to what flu is like, it's still a dangerous public statement to make. So I think that the first thing that the Federal Reserve, the first week the Federal Reserve came out, well, this could cause a lot of economic problems, but we'll be there. We know how to handle this. So the Fed will take care of it. Don't sweat it. If there's a downturn, they know how to handle it. But it's just getting things in a proper perspective. I sure hope my suspicions are right. And I guess I'm influenced by that mess that came out in '76, and I watched all this, and all this money, that program lasted for 6 months, then they had to cancel. They did half the people in the country, then they had to cancel the rest. There's better ways to doing things than letting a bureaucrat do it. The one reason is if you make a mistake, which they'll say, won't you, if you have your freedoms, won't you make a mistake? Sure you are. But hopefully it'll be very well contained. But if you get somebody in charge of the FDA and all these other things, or the TSA or something like that, you get people in charge of that, they ruin it for everybody. It is devastating. So this is the reason we want. It's through this understanding for people to be willing to take a position and say, yes, I want my freedom back and get out of my life.
This comes from Ferdinand from Netherlands. He asks, how can we translate the philosophy of freedom to practical solutions, for example, to seriously diminish the size and power of governments?
Well, the size in our government is not going to be reduced by getting a few more new members to Congress. You say, well, you would be helpful, but it's not going to happen. You know, if you had the perfect president who would do the things he should do, I mean, first, Congress would they would unanimously impeach him within a week. And if that didn't work, they'd have the CIA agents out, which it doesn't bother them to dispose of their enemies. So, no, it's not going to work. The ideas have everything. Ideas make all the difference in the world. They have consequences. When they're good ideas, you can change the world. When they're bad, you end up with a mess that we have. And that's ideas are very, very powerful, and that's the area that I think we should work in. And it is, I think self-preservation is very important because we should do that, but I think the additional explanation on why this is a strong message is important because self-preservation isn't totally secure, because if you are successful in self-preservation, you know, there's still too many people around that they're coming for you, and that's what we have to prepare for. But I happen to endorse the principles of nonviolence. I don't think it's worth it. I think it's ideological, the whole thing. But they don't agree with me, and my enemies don't agree with me. So,
all right, this is a three-parter. This comes from James in Irving. He asks, what happens when the cost of our public debt begins to exceed the annual budget of our military? Will citizens wake up? Will government finally have to answer for its mismanagement, or do you see an authoritarian society with individual sovereignty destroyed to feed the government machine?
They're going to feed the government machine. Until it self-destructs. And the Federal Reserve will self-destruct, and this whole system will self-destruct. And if you don't have a change in our direction, then you're going to have a static, stale economy. It'll last years and years and years. But if you had somebody that would come up and say, this is what you have to do, and you had enough people. But if you don't change people's minds to accept this, if right now you don't hear too much about liberty in all the campaign debates, you hear about when am I going to get my free stuff? You know, that's all they're concentrating on. And yet, in spite of all this negative thinking on my part, I still think that you're not alone. I think there's a lot of people out there, and I think there's a lot of young people. I think they're in the colleges, and they're being whipped into silence, but I think they're there, and they need to hear it from as many people as possible. But it's a difficult situation. You don't know exactly, but I don't think if I came here and said, we're on the verge of it, we need 10 new members this year and 10 new members this year, and we'll test them and make sure that it's not going to work. That's not going to work. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try it because of the message. Anybody that wants to go to Congress in order to be a congressman and work within a system to change the laws, I don't think he's worth his salt. I think he has to go with a precise thing of setting a standard and saying, you know, this is what we should do, and set an example. And the more you have that, the merrier. And, you know, Leonard Read was a favorite of mine. He had the Foundation for Economic Education. And he says, you can't get those people just by, you know, saying, I'm going to get you, and grab their shirt collar and say, listen, you guys don't know what you're talking about, this is what you do. No, you don't do it. You got to keep plugging away, presenting your case, and then people might come and ask. For the first 15, 20 years, I used to go to colleges for 15 people. So now we have this silliness, more people will come. So no, which delights me to tell you the truth. So it's something that is achievable if we get people to change their minds is the big thing.
This next person would like to remain anonymous. Is Mexico going to be the next Venezuela?
I don't know Mexico that well to say that next month they'll be like Venezuela, but I think the world is going to be like Venezuela.
There.
I'm going to, let's hope the United States never gets that bad because it's so involved. But the system, it's not a workable system. Fiat money doesn't work. And it's based on fraud, it's based on counterfeiting, and it's based on big government. These deficits are unsustainable. So whether it's Mexico or wherever, but there'll be more, and we're reaching that point. And I have a date I didn't mention. Sometimes I mention it in my speech that made me stop and think that, I said August 15th, 1971 was a major day because we closed the gold window and went to total fiat. But on September 17th of last year, it was a significant event. And you said, what are you talking about? Well, that was the morning that the markets woke up and they had the repo interest rates hit 10%. And we fixed that rate, pump it in. So it took them a few hours to figure out what they had to do, but they've been doing it constantly. They turned on the spigot again, and they are in QE. So we're moving rapidly toward that point, and Powell admits you can't lower interest rates and solve the problem. And nobody's going to cut any spending. Once again, the budget was presented to us last week, and it presented a balanced budget. They all do. This one is in 15 years. So it's just talk. And, but it's a philosophy of government, and that's what has to come. What should the role of government be? That's, to me, the first step I ask young people, what should the role of government be? And they'll say, well, provide free health care. And, they go on a litany of saying, protect the world. No. The purpose of government, if you're going to have it, is for the protection of liberty. And it shouldn't be doing anything else.
This next question comes from Florida. It's another three-parter. Is there hope for the U.S.? Or is this a world epidemic of government control? How do we take baby steps to create a better future?
Were they mixing that up with viruses, or is this just the economic?
Doesn't say.
Pardon me?
It doesn't specify.
Oh, okay. No, I think that I think it's a world event, and I think the dollar's in charge of the distortions, and it was schemed, from World War II on. We became a military power. We did not suffer anything like the other countries did in Europe and Asia, and they suffered more overseas, and they have worse policies. Matter of fact, when they established the euro and the European Union, I said, it's not going to work. I don't think the euro is going to work. And it hasn't been destroyed, but it's not worth much now. So no, that system is all coming apart. And I don't think right now, most people agree that the economy is worse in Europe than the United States because we're a little wealthier and people still take our dollars and we still, print the money. But and our dollar gets some strength because everybody else is weaker. No, when a big crunch comes, it's going to be worldwide. And that's why we have to be concerned about the militarism that is being built, because governments notoriously have used military operation to deflect the concerned messages coming and the talks and the promises of the politicians, mostly bipartisan. I'll give you a hint on how to handle it. Just assume they're not telling you the truth.
And this is the final question from Philip in New Hampshire. He wants to know, and he's here. Do you recommend parents vaccinate their children?
Was that a question?
Yes. Do you recommend parents vaccinate their children?
I recommend that the parents have the responsibility of making that decision. But I know he wants a little bit more of a question on probably what my opinion is on vaccinations. Well, the real evil is this compulsory vaccination and getting these cocktails, which causes a lot of harm, and they never report the harm done by that. Parents should have the responsibility. There should not be the compulsion. I would, but I don't take a position in telling anybody ever asked me, don't ever give your child an inoculation of any vaccine. No, I think, when I was in high school, friends were dying pretty routinely with polio, and that was a scary disease. And then by the time I got through college and started medical school, I started medical school in '57. I never saw a case of polio. And I would not want to say that people should never have taken those shots back then. But the big thing is, parents might make a mistake, but it's going to be less threatening to the world and to them than if the government makes the mistake. Just like that swine flu, 500 cases of the complication. I will think of it a second.
That's all our questions. We have a few minutes left. Do you have any closing words, final thoughts, anything you'd like to say before we go?
Well, no, but I enjoy coming here because I assume there's a couple free market people, free minds. See, a lot of people will say, hey, you really encourage us. The truth is, I'm very selfish. I get encouraged by what you do and giving the support. I like people when they notice my program and try to help me out on Ron Paul Liberty Report, because I spend a lot of time on that now with Daniel. We had these. I'm not a technical person, but YouTubes were used a lot in my presidential campaign. A YouTube video. I said, why don't I just do those? They were pretty popular. But before you knew it, we had volunteers that came in and would help build the studio. It's not the fanciest studio ever, and we have one technician who does a fantastic job because we do a lot of interviews, overseas interviews, and interviews here in the States. So I felt I like doing that because I still have an effort to sound off. I told my wife when I first was running, I said, I just got to get it off my chest. This is terrible. Nobody's talking about it. That was back in '71. But that's when she told me, she says, well, why are you doing this? And I told her, I said, I just want to talk about this monetary policy. And she's the one that said, it's dangerous doing that. I said, why would it be dangerous? All I'm going to do is nobody's going to listen. She says, no. She said, you're going to get elected. And she saw that as more of a danger, right, to disrupt my medical practice and all that. But sometimes I don't always have the total control of my future. Things work out the way they work out. But I want to thank you all for your strong support, and it's been a delight to be here.